All right, so hello everyone. Welcome to day 2 of our conference. It is the first of its kind for LGBTQ Fulbrighters. My name is Michaela Gill. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am co-founder and vice president of Fulbright Prism. You may have heard this spiel before already, but very briefly, I want to thank you to our volunteers, first of all, for helping run this conference and organize the whole thing. Everything we do is volunteer run. None of us gets paid for any of it, but we're able to do it because of the funding that we received from the Citizen Diplomacy Action Fund, which is the CDAF from the US State Department, and the group of volunteers that received the grant. We're also grateful to Fulbright Germany and Fulbright Bulgaria for their immense support and partnership. But if you're interested, I will be putting some links in the chat that might help you navigate the conference, and there will be a donation link so that we can do things like this in the future. A lot of you know about Fulbright Prism already, but if you want to learn more, I'm going to post our website in the chat, and you can follow us on Instagram at Fulbright Prism. And now I'm going to hand it over to Yasha. So go ahead, please introduce yourself and we can get started.
Great, thanks, Michaela. Good morning, everyone. My name is Yasha Hoffman, he, him, and I did a Fulbright in Kazakhstan in 2018 to 2019. And so I prepared this little presentation today to just kind of go over, well, basically there's like two things I want to cover. So like, what did I actually do in my Fulbright? And then how did that inform and kind of interact with, LGBT experiences and issues. And yeah, I think there's like some connections between things I found out in my research and things that I experienced myself as a gay man. So I also want to mention that I do definitely want this to be very interactive. You can feel free to just butt in and comment or ask any type of questions that you have at any point about anything. Yeah, so just definitely don't be afraid to speak up. And I'm wondering, I have literally not used Zoom in like months. So do they have the hand raise feature? I'm going to be, because I see some of y'all, but yeah, you can just feel free to unmute and just ask a question if there's a pause. So, yeah, with that said, I want to provide a quick overview of what I did on my Fulbright. So I had a research Fulbright in Almaty, Kazakhstan from August 2018 to June 2019. It was in ethnomusicology. So the main things I did, I was like studying at the National Conservatory. I was helping one of my good friends, Grace, lead this program called Next Notes, which I'll talk about in just a couple of slides. Then there was this, and the title of this PowerPoint on the official agenda for the Prism conference alludes to this, where there was a concert lecture series that I kind of got roped into doing. I did like 6 concert lectures for elementary school kids on Kazakh music. And then my main research topic was like on the music and the cultural kind of legacy and memory of Bukharian Jews, which is an ethnic group predominantly in Uzbekistan, who all basically like 98% of them all fled from Uzbekistan into New York and Israel. And then I took some language lessons as well. For those of you who aren't super familiar, here's Kazakhstan. Almaty is like right, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but it's like right in the south by this little lake right here, right by the Kyrgyz border. So the certificate, so I had like a 1-year certificate at the conservatory in composition. I also did a bunch of like classes and group lectures, and I studied a number of Kazakh national instruments, the dombra, the zhedigen, and the kulkobas, which the dombra being my favorite. So then there's also a lot of really interesting topics on how like music and kind of like nationalism as well go hand in hand, and how the Kazakh government really, well, not just Kazakhs, like all of Central Asia really uses the symbolism and the imagery of these instruments to represent their nation state. Here's the conservatory where I went to classes, just a quick little pick, right across the street from where I lived. So I initially had planned to research kind of like Jewish music and like Jewish culture in Kazakhstan. And what I quickly found was that it was basically just like very Chabad, which is kind of, I find not too different kind of anywhere in the world. There wasn't anything like particularly unique about the Kazakhstani Jewish scene, but this is the Chabad. I was there pretty frequently and for various events. There's just me, the bunch of the Lubavitchers. And, you know, it wasn't, there was some interesting things musically, like this dude playing some things on piano, but more, the research focus kind of shifted to the Uzbekistan kind of sphere. And then I had a trip later in my Fulbright. But there was interesting things that I would comment on just with gender norms. Like, so everyone kind of dressed alike as I would, you know, see in like New York or whatever, Milwaukee or Chicago. I'm currently, I should have provided some background, actually, I forgot about this, but currently live in Madison, Wisconsin. So yeah, basically like they were way more strict with separating genders, even outside of the synagogue. Like there was like a Hanukkah event. I remember I went to like a party in an external restaurant, and they still had like men and women sit apart, like on opposite sides of the room. And I was like, well, this is, this is like, I was like, I would like to just maybe interact with some non-men, right? Like, but anyway, so that was just, it was a lot more strict than anywhere I'd ever seen. But so that was that. And then I guess the other thing about this is the wedding scene particularly. You can see here on the right, that cloth goes over the woman's face. She literally can't see anything. It's a totally opaque cloth until I think like the end of the entire ceremony. I'm not familiar with all of the like Orthodox customs, but I just remember then like I was like, and I totally had crashed this wedding too, like absolutely. And so they were just like, yeah, come by, all these like older guys. So then they were like, in the speech, you know, like the whole celebratory speech, like at the dinner and stuff, they were like, this woman is now like your property, and like you, and then they're like, let's dance to this. And I was like, I don't know about that. But anyway, so I think that also contributed to a shift in focus for my research topic. But anyhow, to move along, actually, let me pause there. Any comments or questions about kind of like the Jewish experience in Almaty? Okay, I'll move along to discussing next notes really quick, which is a project started by my good friend Grace. And it's basically just it happened a couple of times. So it's a community of musicians in Kazakhstan that offers programs and workshops for young people like ages 16 through 30 to develop their musical skill set. So it's funded by the US consulate, and pretty competitive applicant pool. We had a good number of applicants and only a portion of them got accepted. So what would happen is like there would be weekly workshops for a few hours with a guest speaker. And these guest speakers were people who were like active in the Kazakhstani like music scene and making music videos, etc. Then we basically took these 22 folks and we split them up into 5 different bands, like randomly, like, okay, now, and then we said, your task is to write and record an original song and then perform it in a live concert. I also was like, who wants to do a music video? And then we got one band to actually make a music video, which is kind of cool. These slides get sent out. There's some links in here. But here's our final concert. It was really nice. So it was really nice to just be able to work with youth and help them like make music that they were proud of. There was, I'd completed a couple of interviews just kind of to tie this into some research topics. And so interviewing one participant, I remember that she had this comment, which is that like about, the comment was about like the Kazakh music scene in general, like what you can get like in pop music. And yeah, so she was like, there of course have been songs that I've liked, but not really any of them if you really want to headphones in to listen to them. And so she cited this one group, 91, as one of these artists. And she kind of was talking about this from the perspective of like, there's more and more artists like coming onto the scene, such as this 91. So it's like, she's like, it's so fun to see people like listening and dancing to them. But it's so interesting that like, because 91 is super controversial in Kazakhstan, and there's this whole documentary called Face the Music by director Katya Suvorova exploring this and all the controversy around it. So specifically, they're very inspired by K-pop. So they're trying to make this new genre called Q-pop or Kazakh pop. And they, you know, dress and they use makeup and they have their hair done like a K-pop star. And this really can grinds the gears of some people who think that Kazakh men need to look a certain way and be a certain way. And so they had to face protests and government like cancellations of their shows, and like the government has to take a side. I think there's like just a lot of tension there. I don't know if it's not the government like made them illegal or whatever, but like there's definitely some tension. And so I think it's just interesting to see, and I guess this is a theme that I'll be bringing back throughout this presentation, is just like Kazakhstan or other nations kind of maybe in the space, like the post-Soviet space or Central Asian space specifically, there's really this tension between like really wanting to go into modernity and also really wanting to hold on to that culture. So an interesting thing, I saw this on Twitter just a couple days ago. And of course, I'm not like a scholar of K-pop, right? So I'm not actually sure. So back to this slide, right? So challenges gender norms. It challenges gender norms, I guess, for whom, right? Like for the Kazakh cultural context. Do K-pop boy bands challenge gender norms in the Korean cultural context? I actually don't know. If anyone has any comments on that, please do speak up. But I think it's so interesting how it's such a global phenomenon. And then it depends on like the culture that it lands on, of like, oh, this is offensive to us, right? Or, oh, whatever, like this is just an expression, or this is just however, like this is just what our kind of standard of beauty is. So this was obviously in Pakistan, not in Kazakhstan, but it was just interesting that just the parallels here with some of the pushback against this K-pop inspired group in Kazakhstan and stuff like this that happens. So the next thing is in Azerigan lesson, you can see me there in the middle on the left. We were preparing for a concert in December. And after this concert, this random dude came up to me. He was like, I'm from St. Petersburg. He was like, I think that it's so interesting that you are an American, like learning these Kazakh instruments. And he was like, I want to kind of develop like concert lectures for school children. And he's like, it would be such a great idea and such a great spin to have a foreigner, like an American specifically, lecturing them about their own kind of Kazakh musical kind of instruments and culture. And no, this was like an ethnically Russian guy as well, not that if that's relevant. And I was like, okay, that sounds maybe interesting. He was really passionate about it. And I was like, okay, fine, let's do it. So I did like 6 of these concerts in a variety of schools, and in English and Russian. They were kind of like, it was a lot of work, but I guess it felt nice because I'm not sure that there's really a lot of these types. Like, I think it was unique of this dude to kind of have this initiative, because there's not like a lot of these types of, I guess, enrichment programs for school children. So I guess I hope it made an impact, but it was just an interesting situation as well of that whole setup of like, oh, you as an American, they'll be more likely to listen to you as an American because, you know, and I think that if any of you have been abroad, I'm sure, depending on the country you've been in, you've probably felt that type of thing as well, right? Where it's like you have disproportionate amount of cachet, like just because you are an American. I do want to actually ask people if they have any, like, has anyone had any experiences like that? And any thoughts on that? Chat. Okay, great. Got a comment from Miley, is it? About how K-pop artists are challenging gender norms. Cool. Thanks for that comment. Any other comments or thoughts so far about any experiences people have had?
We will also have time for questions at the end, so feel free if something comes up between now and then. You can either pop it in the chat or we'll do a little Q&A at the end.
Yep, definitely. Thanks. Yeah. Oh, cool that you, yeah, I'm reading this other comment that you wrote a paper on gender norms. Amazing. Okay, great. All right, so to advance here, there is okay, so the story behind this particular article getting written about me is just, I think what happened is this. I think I was like out with some conservatory friends, and you know how Kazakhs do it. Like there's like 9 people in one booth at a bar. And I think the question was posed to me like, oh, so how are you finding Kazakh girls? And I was like, well, I'm not really. And they were like, what? But they're so beautiful and amazing. I was like, yeah. I was like, I don't know if girls are for me. And then everyone was shocked. And then they were like, wow. And they're like, that's so cool. I think they were like generally kind of like, wow, that's cool. And then I think one of the friends of one of the guys or whatever was like, can I write an article for this outlet called, I don't actually know. I was looking at like yesterday. I was like, I can't really tell how large this is. Like, I don't know what kind of outlet this really even is. But yeah, they didn't interview. And one of the things that, like one of the main highlights was my thoughts on like gay clubs and like the gay culture in Almaty specifically. One other thing I thought was funny is like in the intro, like the tagline for the article, it says like, a US citizen named Yasha Hoffman who purposefully came to Kazakhstan in order to master the national instruments of our steppe ancestors, which is so dramatic. And so the next slide, I'm gonna share a section from, like there's a section of the article called like LGBT life in Almaty, and it's a really bad translation via Google. So what happened, the interview was in Russian, but then he like, the author like definitely like put his own spin on the words. So I approved it prior to publishing, but it's still right. It's just an interesting, I think you'll see what I mean when I advance. There is a quick content warning. The slide includes written mention of anti-LGBT violence. So this is basically just directly copied over from the section. So I talked about visiting a gay club, and so I was like, so he definitely paraphrased my words. So he was like, so most of the people there aren't even gay, but it's interesting because in Russian, gay, like it's representatives of non-traditional orientation, which is an interesting way to put it. Kind of, I think, parallel to how in English, right? You could use homosexual, but like if you use homosexual, it's like weird and formal and stiff and borderline homophobic, because like, why are you using that word? But I think this phrase in Russian, I think, takes the cake even over homosexual. Yeah, it's just is used like a number of times. But just mentioning like how non-LGBT folks go there for other reasons. Does that mean that they're allies? I don't know. I didn't talk about that. But this is just a bad translate here, because so again, this next sentence is the same thing as like, by the way, it's quite easy to meet folks who are of a non-traditional representatives of a non-traditional orientation in Almaty. And so I guess what I'm trying to say in this one is that like people do, like they're not like always super discreet and stuff. Like they'll make themselves known potentially like in a bar or a space like that. But I think I'd heard of like a friend of a friend who had something bad happen to her in that third bullet point. And then I just commented on like, I was basically like, Kazakhs shouldn't, or I guess not be like Kazakhs shouldn't, but like I was like, people shouldn't generally like be so anti-gay. You know, I was like, there's gays everywhere, so people should just be accepting of gays. I think the conclusion was funny too. of the article inset in general. It was like, despite all the small nuances and inconveniences that I'm sure are found everywhere, Kazakhstan is a very interesting country with incredible cultural baggage. In this case, I think it's in a positive. I think in English, baggage has like this negative connotation, but in this case, it means like a richness. So point of this is to say, right, like, I don't know how large, I don't think this is a very large publication at all, but like that they thought that this would be something that would get reads or clicks or whatever, and that they published these things. I was like, this is interesting. I was like, I don't know if it made an impact. We'll never know. But I just thought it would be good to kind of, if I had the opportunity to get that kind of stuff out there and see, I don't know. But yeah, so now the next slide, more about like my personal experiences. So there were a couple, so there's one particular event, I think it is still ongoing. This really cool guy hosts these parties called Amirovki, which used to be at a hotel. I think they like kind of switch venues. I think it does have to kind of be under the radar. Both these parties, and as well as this, I think there's one gay bar currently in Almaty, which for context, city of 1.5 million. It's called Monroe. But so yeah, like, and I've heard stories of like how there used to be another gay bar that was a lot better at this other hotel, but then the hotel owner was like, no, we can't have a gay bar in my hotel. And so like they got the city and the police or whatever to like kick them out. And so like they have to go to another bar. But these Amirovki was interesting because, you know, it was like a great space where like queers would come together and they would have drinks and they would have games and they would have like HIV tests and, you know, other folks who were like whose job was to like do tests and stuff like that and like I guess hand out condoms, stuff like that. That was interesting because I had a number of experiences with like going on dates with guys like in public, right, like at a cafe or whatever, and sometimes I would ask these guys, I'd be like, do you want to go to this Amirovki? And they'd be like, no. They're like, no, I can't be in a place where like if like you would be absolutely like read as gay. And I think most of the people who I had like seen over the course of that year are, I think, currently with women. I remember that once, like one time there was like this one dude and he was like, you're gonna marry a woman, right? And I was like, no, I don't think I'm gonna do that. And he was like so shocked. And I was like, oh no. I realized like there's no like, he was like from I think a smaller town and he just moved to Almaty, I think recently. And I was like, oh, he really doesn't see like that it's even like that it would like be a possibility to not be with a woman. And so I think that kind of relates to this next thing, which is the matchmaker's answer. And so like this photo here is from a Jewish event. And this woman on the right standing up, she is this matchmaker who was born in Russia, but then she immigrated to Israel. So no connection to Kazakhstan, but she had come to visit, like I think the Chabad brought her. And I had an interesting experience with her because, so actually my mom was in town because I actually had like a little ski accident. So she was just helping me recover from that. And so this was like March 2019. So she basically had like a whole lecture on like a good Jewish family and what that is and what that means. And so I came up to her afterwards and I was like, I'm interested in building a proper Jewish family, but I know I'm going to marry a man. So what suggestions do you have? And she said, and I'm just quoting from the blog post that I wrote about this, well, that's not possible. Like for each male soul, God has made a strong or a female counterpart. And I was like, well, it's not really my choice to be gay. It's just like kind of this feeling that I have inside. And she said, she started delineating between animalistic urges, like feelings, and human rational thought. And then she, of course, had to jump in there with that. You in America with your freedom, there can be too much freedom, and it causes us to stray from the laws mandated for us. God created animals before humans, and in doing so, designated a certain order to his creation. He bestowed humans with soul, like a spirit, precisely so they could overcome their primal instincts. To overcome this, you will need daily Torah study and to see a therapist. I was like, But it totally mirrored, I think, this attitude that I found throughout Kazakhstan. That, and kind of like, this is, of course, so, okay, for some more background as well. Russia has their famous anti-gay propaganda law. Kazakhstan thought about it in like 2014, but in 2015 they vetoed it. So there's no such law. They didn't veto it. They didn't move it forward in the legislature to pass it. I think because they were gunning for the Olympics, they were gunning for a number of like high-profile international events. I think so. That's kind of the main reason there. But the point is that Russia has a ton of influence over the whole region, and specifically Kazakhstan is like one of the most kind of still like Kazakhstan in general doesn't have a very big problem with Russia, I think, as opposed to some other Soviet states like the Baltics or the Caucasus. So there is this, like what the matchmaker said, I think kind of mirrors this thought that like a minority culture, whether it is Russian or Central Asian culture in the face of prevailing Western culture, right? Like, or whether it's like Jewish culture in the face of a non-Jewish world, like that you really have to kind of buckle down and kind of stay true to your culture and stand up for how it's traditionally been, so that it's not like diluted or lost. And yeah, so I just think it was, yeah, that's just an interesting parallel there with the Judaism and the gayness. So I think generally, this is like kind of my conclusion here, so then we can have some discussion afterwards. But I would say that generally, Almaty does seem to be a city of tensions and contradictions. So it's globalized, it's cosmopolitan. It plays 90s American hip hop in trendy cafes and cutting edge beats in European style nightlife venues. There's outlets that will publish a foreigner's take on gay life in the country. 2 days before I saw The Matchmaker, I saw a play called Visiting Mr. Green, if any of you know it, it's fantastic, where one of the main themes is homosexuality and its tension with like Judaism. Specifically, there's an older man who's like, what? How can you not marry a woman? You have to marry a woman. But the guy's like, I'm gay. And like, that was put on by the top decorated actors in the top state theater, like dramatic theater, like right in Almaty. But at the same time, it's a place where people are definitely respecting and knowing their tradition and generally aren't willing to sacrifice their communities and their families to identify with a concept like gay, that's, I think, the really interesting thing that I realize is like, there's this hurdle that must be overcome if you're going to like come out, or if you're going to live your life as a queer person. That's so different for different contexts and places and people. And I think in Kazakhstan, it's so much larger than like in America, for example, or I guess in most parts of America. And it's just at such a level that it's just really, really, you have to really risk losing everything if you're really going to be like, I am, gay, and this is my life, and this is my non-opposite sex partner, etc. So I guess ultimately the last thing I'll say as well is I totally recommend visiting this area of the world. I loved it. It was so amazing. Can't wait to go back. I did end up, by the end of my 10 months there, I was like really ready to go. I was like, I just need visible queerness. I was like, I need to go to a cafe and clock someone that's not gay, or sorry, not straight. And I was like, I just need to be in a place where like you could potentially, for example, hold hands with someone in public. Not like, I mean, yes, of course, there's a risk of like violence, but like you just wouldn't do that. So yeah, that is what I have. So please let me know if you have comments or questions.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I think you touched on so many issues. So I would love if people had questions about music and gender, like the K-pop, Q-pop comparison you made, life in Kazakhstan in general, sexuality and religion, the push and pull of tradition versus modernity. There are so many questions that can come out of that. But so please put them in the chat or come off mute, but I'm going to get us started here. The kind of blurb that you chose for this presentation was, I, a queer man, entered a bunch of Kazakh elementary schools and managed to withhold all mentions of gay propaganda. What made you choose that blurb? I'm so curious.
So
How, did it come up in your experiences in the schools?
it did not. So I was just talking to Alexander, and what did he say? They're like, "Oh, can you have like clickbaity style title?" And I was like, "Haha, let me just throw this." I was like, they were like, "Wow, it's perfect. I love it." And I was like, "Wait, no, just kidding." But then I was like, you know what? If people like it, fine, I'll leave it. So yeah, it is very clickbaity in that no, nothing dramatic happened. None of these kids were like gay, and then there was no like issue that ensued, um, that I can recall. Yeah, so it did not come up. I don't think that particular section has a lot of intersections with with queerness, but it was just interesting to me to see how schools are, um, and I don't know. Okay, I can really, my ADHD brain can totally run with something and just keep going with it. But like, I was just talking about like sex education with like one of my friends just the other day, totally unrelated topic. But I was like, the schools there in Kazakhstan, I think, are like they just have a lot less money than like our schools in America. And so I was like, if we can't have like certain type of topics, I do wonder what is taught. So that was an interesting glimpse into just like how public schools function. And as I wasn't an ETA, I wasn't like in a school setting like all the time. So it was just those 6 times I was in schools, and 2 of them were like private, like lots of money per year, and 4 of them were like more like just public, like regular schools out in the middle of wherever. Just interesting. Like that was my only glimpse of the school system in Kazakhstan. So I think, I guess, yeah, it just made me think about like what were they being taught, and like how is that creating their society. But I feel like, yeah, there's no further comments on how that interacts with LGBT
Got it.
issues.
Got it. Well, something that we ask most people, at least that we talk to or profile, is can you tell us one thing maybe that was the most challenging aspect of your Fulbright experience, and then maybe one of your fondest memories?
You mean, are you asking specific from a like, queer perspective?
It certainly can be, but it's not required. I'm just kind of curious. I mean, again,
Yeah,
we touched on so many issues, so it does not have to be specifically queer.
I would say it was that thing that I mentioned in my final slide of like it was just hard after a number of months to just be seeing guys and like having them refuse to do uh go to like this one event that there was, and just like, yeah, just like not seeing any type of queerness really outside of like very particular spaces. um yeah, I think that was like probably the challenge. And then the best part of it is, let me go back a slide. These mountains right here, like you can take a city bus for like 12 cents right into the mountains from the city center. And so you can just, wake up, out, bus right into the mountains, and then go on a hike, which is just amazing. So I think I that was my favorite part, is like, well, Almaty is so nice. Like there's so many like nice food venues and like cool, yeah, like nightlife venues, and it's all so accessibly priced for if you're an American. Another like just like yeah, just very cheap. But I think the nature and like the mountains and the accessibility to just going up there and hiking or skiing or whatever it is fantastic. And the food is cool.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Feel free to come off mute if you want. Give people a second to ask anything. There we go. There is a question in the chat. I'll read it out so everyone can hear it. I'm curious if you noticed any other signifiers of queerness, particular to the regional culture that may not be common in the US. Great question. Thank you.
Yeah. Um, so one thing that I'll say that so okay, to answer the question directly first, there's an interesting, so culturally, the mix between like Kazakh and kind of Russian is its own interesting thing. So in Kazakh culture, which is like the nomadic, like steppe, and there is the musical instruments that I show there's clothing, there's textiles, there's all these cultural signifiers. There's not that I'm aware of. Like, for example, there's some cultures that I've had historically various genders or types of folks who are a mixture, I guess, of like gender sexuality that is different, that have had different roles in society. I don't think in Kazakh culture there's been anything like that. So there's nothing, I think, traditionally in Kazakh culture that we could like put under the queer umbrella. And then in like the Russian side of things, I think, so if y'all are familiar with like Pussy Riot, like they're very kind of like bombastic kind of activism and self-expression, and kind of, I think that's generally kind of the mood, and to broaden things from just queerness to like also more like feminist types generally. I think you do get that influence of like, they're like ready to buzz off their hair, they're ready to like go at it, like punk rock, whatever it is. So I think that is kind of an aesthetic that we can get specifically, I guess, for like queer women, that I guess it's common to the US, but I think it's like maybe more of a way to be in the post-Soviet area. But the other thing that I wanted to mention that this brings to mind is there's an article that I remember reading about like queerness in like the Middle East. And it relates a lot to what I was seeing in Kazakhstan, where basically people have been engaging in same-sex relationships for centuries, if not, I mean, all of human history. But it's just in some places, people do it at you know, at the bathhouses, at whatever random places, but everyone still has their wife and everyone still has like their nuclear traditional family unit, but some people are just out there doing that gay stuff. And so it's interesting because like I remember I had a friend who was, you know, she was an American, but she was like, you know, in her 30s. And so she had some guy friends and they would just talk so nonchalantly about going and like going like out with their mistress or like someone who wasn't their wife. Like they would have a wife, but they would also just be going out and engaging with other women who weren't their wives. And then she was like, it's so normal. Like, it's just like what you do. Like, like if you're a man and you have a desire, you like act on that desire basically. And I think that does parallel with how a lot of queer people also had to do what they wanted to do. And the interesting thing about the article was that this Western idea of, oh, I am gay, like my identity is gay, this is what it is to be as a gay person or whatever, that's like a Western import, and that like a lot of these like Middle Eastern countries are like specifically pushing back against that. And so being like, oh, they want gay, we're going to give them the opposite, really cracking down on that kind of thing, when before it was really like common, but then there's still its own moral quandaries of like, well, that's cheating and not really respectful. Anyway, so I think there's like some other, yeah, I could go on that topic as well for a while, but that's what I'll leave it with, if that answered your question at all.
Any other questions from anyone here? I did notice we had a few late joiners, so please know that this has been recorded and it will be posted on YouTube later. So if you missed the first part, that's perfectly fine. If nobody has any other questions, oh, there's one more in the chat. How did you prepare for your time in Kazakhstan? Were you aware of the nuances of queerness in Kazakhstan before beginning your grant?
Oh, thank you for this question, actually, because it reminds me that I forgot to give more context, which was, so I'm from Minnesota, but my mom is from Moscow, a bit of this Russian heritage background. And so when I went to UW-Madison, I joined the Russian flagship program. And so in the Russian flagship program, you have to go abroad for you have to do like an 8-week summer program, and then you have to do a full year. And so I did my summer program in summer 2015 after my freshman year. And it was in Kazakhstan. Like I was hoping, you know, I mean, we're all, of course, like expecting like St. Petersburg or something like that. But then that's when like tensions were high and like there was all these sanctions and stuff. So they cut all the Russian programs. And I was like, well, okay, Kazakhstan, that sounds fun. And then when I got there, I totally like fell in love with the country, as you can see from this photo. and just everything about it. And I also fell in love with the idea that it's a place that Americans literally have never heard of. And so I was like, this is cool to like learn about something that Americans literally don't know about. And so I spent kind of the next year, like the rest of my college career, basically being like, how can I go back here, and like how, like what kind of like Fulbright, or like what can I do? And then I decided Fulbright, and then I said, okay, what can I do to get there? And so, yeah, I'd been in Kazakhstan for 2 months after my freshman year, and I experienced some, I'm trying to think of like all the queer things I'd gotten into, not like a lot, but like, you know, I had a little bit of that context after spending 2 months in the country. So of course I wasn't aware of all the nuances, but yeah, I think for like, as I mentioned, like for like 6-8 months, more like 8 months, I was like perfect. Like this is all going great. And then only after like 8 months or so, I was like, okay, now the lack of queerness is getting to me. But yeah. And then I guess Lara, I don't exactly know how to pronounce that, but St. Olaf, cool. I have a lot of friends who went to St. Olaf. I'm from Morris, because U of M campus in Morris. But so a very small town on the western prairie. That's like 3 hours west of Minneapolis and like 2 hours south of Fargo.
Great. Thank you so much, Yasha. We're going to cut this off now because we are going to give everyone a little stretch. And then our next event is in about 45 minutes at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We hope you will join us for another storytelling session. Thank you so much, Yasha, for telling us your story of your Fulbright experience and for answering some of our questions. Take care, everyone. Have a good one.
My pleasure. Thank you.